So this looks really good. This is more than most people would expect from a site builder to create. We were able to put everything into the right boxes and position it roughly so that it actually looks good as a slideshow. There's of course some style changes that we would need to make. The last thing that we're going to do before we leave this is to adjust the look of this previous pause next control. So again, this is something that might be above the call of duty for a site builder, but we'll go through it anyway. It's not all that tricky. What we're going to have to do is for our previous and next buttons, we'll set a background image and then we'll hide the text by setting a negative indent on it. This is a standard trick in CSS. Next, what we need to do is position it so that it's positioned over the image in the right places, which is just a matter of playing a little bit and making sure that the offset for margin is right. This middle bit for the pause and resume doesn't have any place on our wireframes, so we're just going to hide that with CSS. Okay, so before we add the styling, let's add our images to our theme so that we can reference them. So I'm going to jump to the resource pack directory, and under site images, we're going to copy our next and previous images. So I'll copy these, and then I'll jump over to our site folder, and inside of our themes custom folder, I'm going to create a new folder called images. And inside of this, we'll paste the next and previous PNG files. So now we just need some CSS modifications. So let's take a look at our styles.css file. And if we scroll down, you'll see the last styles that we have to deal with in this file are our next and previous buttons, our previous button, our next button, and our pause link. Now our next and previous button have a lot in common, and this is what they have. The height and width we're going to set to 54 pixels, which is the size of our background image. We'll set the text indent to almost negative 10,000 here to move the text outside of the viewport of the browser, so it basically hides it. We'll set the position to absolute, which basically erases it as a block element that affects any other block elements on the page and allows us to position this item on top of other items. We're going to set the display to block because this is a link. A link isn't typically a block, it's usually displayed inline. So we'll set the display to block, which will allow these height and width settings to hold. We'll set the z-index to 99. Now the z-index is what allows us to layer pieces of content on a site, particularly when we position it with absolute. We can then position those absolute layers using z-index. We want it to display on top of the slideshow, which is also using absolute positioning for the node content, and setting it to 99 will bump it up enough. Now the higher the number here, the more on top it will be. And then we'll set the margin top to 160 pixels, which will basically bump it down 160 pixels, overlaying it on top of the slideshow. So now with this style, both our next and previous buttons are going to be located in the exact same place. So we're going to position the previous button to give it a margin left of 50 pixels so that it will bump it over a little bit to give it some margin between the edge of the image and the beginning of the arrow. And we'll set the background image to our previous arrow. For the next button, we're going to set the margin to 590 pixels, which will bump it way over to the right side of the slideshow image, and we'll set the background to next.png. Finally, we'll hide the pause link by setting it to display none. Again, all of these selectors that you see here look complicated, but once you get a sense of how to find selectors when looking at source code, you would find that discovering these would be pretty straightforward. Okay, so I'm going to copy all of this content and paste it over into our custom.css file, which again is our custom sub Bartik theme, and we'll save it. Now if we go back to the browser and refresh, you'll see our previous and next buttons now look like these nice arrows, and we can use them in order to navigate between the items. Our pause and resume is gone, and our controls aren't taking up any space above the slideshow like they were before, which is part of the magic of the absolute positioning. So this isn't perfect, but it gives us a pretty good idea of how ultimately this will look and the particular areas where these different controls are.